You know, the question of the war in Gaza is one that is alive and well. It continues to generate reactions and questions, and in reaction to my sentiment, there are hundreds of questions that have come about, raising pertinent issues. Is two-state solution the solution? How do we deal with non-state actors? What is the nature of the state of Israel? What is the nature of Palestine? What is the role of the international community? What should the International Court of Justice do in the face of the representation by South Africa? Too many questions to answer, but it sends the clear message that the world is concerned. You know, the conflict in Gaza is a conflict that has generated different reactions, and this is to be understood. We saw this in the early years of the Nakba in 1948. We saw this in 1967 in Yom Kippur. We saw this in 1973. We saw these kinds of reactions in the Intifada. And I note that there have been quite a number of reactions since I made my position known on the ongoing conflict in Gaza. First of all, it's always good to preface a response to reactions with the caveat that nobody has a monopoly of knowledge, nobody has a monopoly of wisdom, that what one does is to share one's perspective with the others in the hope that that enriches the debate. I see a number of comments here about the Balfour Declaration. And it must be remembered that the Balfour Declarations was a series of events beginning as it were in 1917, and there were also similar declarations in 1948 that were an offshoot of that declaration. And I can't agree more with those who say that because of the decision at that time, in 1917 initially and 1948 culminating in the creation of what was fundamentally a Jewish state, and the failure of the world at that time to create a Palestinian state, that in many ways has been the genesis of the conflict. So that the Israelis have always been seen by the Palestinians and the Arab neighbors as an occupying force. And many of the wars that have been fought have been on the basis that we are dealing with Israel, which is a Zionist regime, which is an occupying force. And it is in that context that all these attempts that have been made through successive administrations, whether it's Yitzhak Rabin, whether it's Menahem Begin, and a little earlier, even during the reign of the administration of Golda Meir, and of course during the Netanyahu periods, and we saw that all these particular problems have gained the attention of the world, culminating much more prominently in the Oslo Accords. And the Oslo Accords were designed to resolve the problem for all times by creating two states. But that was never to be. We ended up with a Palestinian Authority, and that Palestinian Authority also had its own problems, leading in the bitter fight between the Hamas and Fatah, and with Hamas occupying Gaza. So when we say that the conflict has brought about many non-state actors such as Hamas, Hezbollah, and all these others, we are actually admitting that this is the time that the world should come and say with no equivocation that if we are to resolve the problem in the Middle East, we must have a two-state solution. A two-state solution whose fundamental anchor is that Israel exists and is recognized as such, that Palestine is recognized as such, and they exist side by side, subject to international law. As to whether that will immunize the region from the conflicts that we continue to see, and including the Gaza war, is one that is out for debate. But what has happened and continues to happen in Gaza is creating enmity, which will be difficult to eliminate for generations to come. The other concern that I've seen or response is the question of what has been described as white supremacy. You know, there are those who argue that those who occupy and control Israel are not Jews in the strict sense, that these are white supremacists who are hiding behind the cloak of Jewishness in order to visit pain upon the Palestinians. In fact, I've heard even in the continent of Africa some arguing that the Israelis who are of Caucasian origin are racists, and they have given the example of how they treat the Ethiopian Jews who are brought to Israel under the Operation Moses. There is merit in that, but I think that the question that we ought to preoccupy ourselves with at this time is how to eliminate conflict in the long run. And the way to eliminate conflict, as we have said times without number, is to find a lasting solution. The danger is that we now see a world that is divided, particularly at the political level. In the Western world, everybody, almost to a man, that is to mean politicians, is reluctant to condemn the Israeli response to the activities on the 7th day of October, the year 2023. And those who argue, therefore, because of the European support, the Israelis are thus encouraged. And there are those who, on the other side, are saying that it is important that the organizations such as Hamas, Hezbollah, and we have now seen the Houthis, ought to be reined in as a condition precedent to any lasting peace. It is an egg and chicken kind of situation. What do you deal with? The international community through the UN have now said that there is need for a pause or a ceasefire, which will enable the world to look at these issues squarely in the face and find a long-term solution. Whether that is going to happen is another debate. We now see within Israel herself that there are centrifugal forces which say that Prime Minister Netanyahu must find a different approach to the war in Gaza, because the Israeli military thought that it would be a quick fix, but is now appearing that it is for the long haul. So my own view is the sooner Europe and America encourage the Israelis to cease fire with a reciprocal understanding that Hamas and other non-state actors such as Hezbollah and the Houthis will also cease fire so that the world can engage in a constructive way, the safer it is, because the whole world is affected by this war. I see here, for example, I have a comment from my friend Douglas Mochama. And Douglas says, unfortunately, the Hamas has used all its time and energy to radicalize all Gazans to hate their longtime neighbors, Israel. completely true. In fact, it is now argued that every other person in Gaza is being told you have a permanent enemy in Israel. And this is bound to happen when somebody loses their family in a bombardment. Then the only reason why they continue to live is for revenge. And this is one of the reasons why the sooner this war is brought to a halt, the safer everybody is. And I can't agree more with the Douglas Mochama, who takes this view that there is radicalization. And it's not only within Gaza. You can see it even in Lebanon by Hezbollah. You can see it even from the rhetoric that one sees coming out of Yemen through the Houthis. So we are living in quite difficult times, particularly as regards this war. And one must comment that it's a war that affects all of us, because when you interfere with shipping in the Gulf of Aden and in the Red Sea, then everybody suffers. Joseph Hudo, have you asked why Israel has blocked two-state solution? If stateless Palestine can hatch October 7th, then what could happen with the state? Security is Israel's prime fear. They are an existential threat. Secondly, how do you expect Israel to defend itself against rockets launched from hostels, UN facilities, residential homes? Please give an example of how to make the war proportionate. A very, very valid question from Joseph there, because it is very easy to say that this war is not proportionate, the response is not proportionate. And we have had, I'm answering this question by Joseph at a time when the ICJ has pronounced itself on the representation made by the South Africans asking Israel to ensure that genocidal acts are not carried out, effectively just stopping short of saying we need a ceasefire. But I hold the view, which view is capable of being interrogated, that you are safer dealing with a state which is recognized under international law, which is obligated to act in a responsible manner. If you don't have a state, and Palestine is not a state within the understanding of, or within the meaning of international law, then it allows organizations such as Hamas to exist. It allows organizations such as Al-Qassam Brigade. It allows organizations such as Hezbollah. It allows other organizations to operate outside of international law. And when they operate outside of international law, in my view, they are a greater threat to Israel, because the weapons that they acquire are acquired in an irregular manner, and you do not know. But if it was a Palestinian state, which is recognized as such, which acquires arms in a regular way, then they would be under obligation to behave properly. Then they would not use human beings as shields. They would not use civilian facilities for purposes of military action. So to that extent, you are safer with a state which is recognized as such, which exists and which is obligated to respect international law. That is not to say that a state within the meaning of international law does not threaten Israel, but then it is easier to deal with it because you and me know that states are involved in conflict, notwithstanding that they are obligated to act otherwise internationally. Once again, we are not engaged or involved in any mathematics so as to know that this is proportionate and this is not proportionate. But if you look at the rhetoric of the military officers in Israel, or the politicians in Israel, they have said, we are going to fight a war like no other war so that Hamas will never operate. We are going to ensure that Gaza is not habitable. And that is not proportionality. Not easy to argue in favor of, and it is easy from the comfort of our armchairs to argue the way we are arguing, but it's not easy for those who are actually in the theater and the arena of war. You and me can afford the luxury of intellectual and cool analysis, but yet the realities on the ground do not lend themselves to the kind of cool analysis in which we are engaged. A man who calls himself Curious George, and let me speak to your curiosity, super curious George. Most of these mistakes make sense, but the point about non-state actors going after civilian target is scary. Make me question the logic. Why can a state actor deem a target necessary for its own political gain, but a non-state actor, which in some of these places and be acting on behalf of their people, cannot go after targets it deems threat? Either countries abide by international law or they don't. You know, the world has known pain. And let us understand, after 1945 war, the so-called World War II, the very reason why the genocide became the focus of international community, and we had a treaty on genocide in 1948 with Israel being the first signatory, was out of what was visited upon the Israelis by the German administration. And it's now accepted that nearly 6 billion Jews were targeted because of their race, they were targeted because of their religion. And then the world said, we must never allow this to happen again, no more genocide. And we even said in Geneva in 1949, we even said, even when we conduct war, because human beings somehow accept that war will always exist, we then obligated combatants that even in circumstances when wars are being prosecuted, there are certain things that must not be done. This is the basis of the 4 Geneva Conventions of 1949. But even after that, we have seen genocide or genocidal activities. We've seen that in Serbia. We have seen that in places like Rwanda, which tells you that both state and non-state actors tend to conduct themselves in a manner that is inimical to the prescriptions and the injunctions that are placed upon them by law. And this in itself is a sad thing. And that is why we have international institutions which punish such individuals. We saw that with Slobodan Milosevic after the Bosnia War, and we have seen that the very reason why you created the International Court of Justice and the International Criminal Court is to ensure that those who do not conduct themselves in a manner that is in keeping with the law will be punished in accordance with the law. And we have these permanent institutions because prior to that, you had ad hoc trials, such as the Nuremberg trials, such as the Tokyo tribunals, such as Sierra Leone, such as Rwanda. But we now know better that these institutions, to the extent that is humanly possible, are going to do that. Once again, always easy to argue in the manner that we do, but yet the reality is that it is not easy. I see here, this is a very interesting argument by Samuel. Zion was made by the Ashkenazi, which are from Russia, Ukraine, Romania, Hungary, Czech, and Australia. There is merit in this, that the Ashkenazis actually are the dominant, but the Sephardims, those who came from Morocco and Northern Africa, really, Israel became a home for all Jews. It is very easy to try and divide the state of Israel as it is now, but the reality is that we are dealing with a state that is recognized as such and which is under existential threat in that part of the world. But what we are telling the Israelis, that there is a solution to this. That solution is two-state. You cannot, in the nature of things, having suffered in the manner that you did under the Holocaust, having been dispersed all over the world, deny another population a right that you yourself are benefiting from. This is what we are saying. And the world will be safer that way. And that, I think, is what the world is telling Israel. Yeah, Julie Okoth, I am very happy you support my views. And I think there is a reason why there is merit in holding the views that we do, because all that we desire is to live in a peaceful environment. All that we have appetite for the continent of Asia and the Middle East and Africa, and indeed is to ensure that we live in an environment that is favorable to all. And this must be understood in the context of the reality in the world, that if there is a war anywhere, it affects all of us. Who, for example, knew that because there is war in the Gaza, there would emerge a Houthi threat that would entail the disruption of maritime activity in the Red Sea, in the Gulf of Aden, in the Gulf of Oman, and therefore affect the supply of oil in the world. So all of us really have a duty to ensure that there is security in the world. Somebody is saying a very interesting, I have an idea to end all wars. How about we elect an international president who all leaders of the world have to answer to? The world is now. You know, I believe that we have contributions to make. There was a time when I believed, and I still haven't abandoned this belief, that the occupation of political office gives one a platform to really put into practice what one is saying. But we must remember that we live in a world where the best intentioned of men and women are not necessarily the ones that appeal to the electorate. The electorate is moved by different considerations. Particularly in Africa, the electorate is moved by money, the electorate is moved by ethnicity, and in as much as one would want to be in such a position, one finds oneself in a position where what one can do is to contribute informally. And it is never lost on me personally that some of the people that I'm most attracted to were never occupants of any political office. I'm attracted to the ideas of Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, known as Mahatma Gandhi, and Martin Luther King Jr., and they became moral forces in the world because it is much more difficult to become a person who is a moral warrior than to be a person who is a political warrior, who is beholden to many interests. But never say never. You never know which voice may call and which voice one may answer to in order to play a much more visible role in the affairs of the world. That is Hilo, who only hides behind the mask 09AZ. But the mask is peeled. You know, the question of the war in Gaza is one that is alive and well. It continues to generate reactions and questions, and in reaction to my sentiment, there are hundreds of questions that have come about, raising pertinent issues. Is two-state solution the solution? How do we deal with non-state actors? What is the nature of the state of Israel? What is the nature of Palestine? What is the role of the international community? What should the International Court of Justice do in the face of the representation by South Africa? Too many questions to answer, but it sends the clear message that the world is concerned, that people are concerned, and that people want a solution to the problem. We will not answer all questions, but we must continue the debate. We must continue to talk about these issues, Because the day we stop talking about them, that is when danger comes in and solutions die. So thank you very much for your comments, those which are interrogative, those which are commendatory, and those which outrightly disagree. The beauty of any debate is that when we disagree, even then, we disagree in an agreeable manner. Thank you.
Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If yes, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: African politics, economy, and increasing power. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.
Tell us what you think in the comment section. Like and share the video, and subscribe so that you don't miss any of our African videos. It's the best way to support us.